Most villages have no asphalt, and instead of paved roads, there are dirt tracks that, in rain, turn into muddy routes. In spring, after the thaw, the village turns into one big quagmire where everyday walking routes become a superhuman challenge for the locals. Any heavier rain is a transport disaster because the mud reaches the ankles, and where the terrain is uneven, it often reaches up to the knees. Ruts in the dirt roads can be so deep that cars become stuck on their undercarriage and require long hours of repairs or towing. Trucks are repeatedly trapped and stand for days in the middle of the village, blocking access and severely limiting local residents' movement. Tractors are the only salvation because they pull cars out of the mud, tow trucks, and enable basic goods exchange between villages. Ambulances and fire brigades often cannot reach those in need at all because roads become completely impassable day and night. In winter, roads fill with ice and drifts, which turns transport into another nightmare and equally often paralyzes access to the nearest centers. In many places, the local road exists only on the map, while in reality it looks like a churned, muddy field without a clear track. Makeshift log bridges regularly collapse after heavy rains, cutting villages off from the world and forcing improvised crossings. Buses do not reach the villages because they cannot get through the mud or washed-out tracks, which isolates residents in terms of transport. A passenger car in such a village is a useless luxury for most of the season, because even more powerful cars often cannot get through the mire. Residents revert to using horses and carts as 100 years ago when technology had replaced that mobility for long decades and the roads have failed again. UAZ vans and old trucks are popular, the only vehicles able to shove through the mud, although even they can be helpless against deep ruts and heavy mud. Many inhabitants own tractors instead of passenger cars because they can both plow the field and pull trapped equipment out of the mud. Children go to school in rubber boots, often carrying shoes and bags to change into during lessons, which shows adaptation to harsh conditions. Pensioners often do not leave the house in bad weather because churned mud and lack of transport deny them access to basic services. Shops do not receive regular deliveries, shelves lie empty for weeks, and residents must plan supplies for long periods of isolation. The postman delivers parcels on foot or by bicycle, wading through mud, which shows that basic services operate at the limit of their capacity. Farmers cannot sell their harvest because trucks cannot reach the fields, and delivery difficulties often make produce lose market value. During thaws, milk in barrels sours before it reaches the dairy, causing losses and forcing farms into local processing. Building a house or shop becomes an ordeal because material deliveries are delayed and work is often done only in winter when the ground is frozen. Villages can be completely cut off from the world for weeks when mud and worsening weather close all crossings. Isolation fosters alcoholism because people drink since there is nowhere to go anyway, and lack of activities amplifies despair and idleness. Doctors do not come because the roads are impassable, so the sick are left alone and harsh conditions deepen the health crisis of local communities. Funerals are sometimes postponed because it is difficult to reach the cemetery, and the delay underlines broken ties and the logistical barriers of rural life. The agrarian economy suffers because transporting agricultural produce often costs more than its value, leading to bankruptcies and abandonment of crops. In many villages, bread is brought only once a week, and the lack of regular deliveries forces families to plan tightly and economize on supplies. Young people flee to the cities, seeing the lack of roads as a lack of future and prospects, which leads to demographic depopulation of villages. Villages become depopulated. Mainly pensioners and people attached to the land remain, which raises the population's average age and weakens the community. Those who remain live in constant makeshift conditions and learn improvisation because the lack of stable infrastructure forces adaptive practices. Travel to school or work sometimes takes 2 to 3 hours on foot through mud or along a frozen road, which exhausts and discourages education. A wedding or funeral is a logistical operation. A tractor or an arranged vehicle is required to transport participants and ceremonial equipment. Many families have special shoes intended solely for walking in mud, which illustrates spending on basic adaptation to the environment. Older people say, the road exists only when the ground freezes, because the winter season reverses the problem and briefly restores communication. Official promises to build roads often end in words, and the lack of implementation leads to frustration and loss of trust in local authorities. Local officials explain it bluntly. Too many villages and too little asphalt, which sounds like the ultimate excuse in the face of a lack of real investment. For residents, it is everyday life, so they say that mud is part of the national landscape that forms part of their local identity and memory. Russian mud has become a symbol of authorities' helplessness because the lack of infrastructure reveals neglect and the absence of long-term development policies. Documentary films show children walking through mud to get to school, which stirs viewers' consciences and sometimes provokes short-lived social anger. Mud-bound villages belong to the poorest regions of the country because isolation hinders development, investment, and basic services for residents. When asphalt appears, people speak of a miracle because a road means an immediate change in opportunities and quality of life for the local community. Often asphalt is laid only in the village center while the rest still drowns in mud, creating local enclaves of prosperity and squalor. Authorities sometimes show photos of new roads, but in reality they are makeshift patches that quickly erode and wash away with the rain. Mud destroys shoes and clothes, so residents spend a significant share of their income on workwear, which burdens household budgets and weakens savings. The lack of roads causes prices in shops to be even twice as high as in the cities, because transport and logistics costs grow exponentially. Without infrastructure investment, such villages face the specter of total extinction because the lack of prospects pushes successive generations to migrate. For many residents, life in the mud is a sad, everyday reality passed down from generation to generation, which they accept as a tragic order.